So welcome everyone, I'm Jason, the creator of the Tabletop Battlefield, and the intro there you saw example of what we're trying to work towards today with our custom 3D printed Iron Star Alliance shield for Warcaster Neo-Mechanika. To follow along with this particular 3D modeling project, all you really need is a basic understanding of the interface of Blender. Alright, to get started, let's work right with the default cube. I'm going to jump to the front view. Let's go to orthographic mode and press N to bring up the dimensions over here. And I want to set the dimensions of the cube to half the size of our shield, because we're going to build half the shield and then mirror it later on. So it's 11 millimeters wide for half the shield, and the z-axis is about 35 millimeters tall. Now we need to take this cube we have here and build out the basic shape of the half of the shield. For that, let's jump into edit mode and go into wireframe mode. And to add the extra geometry, what we're going to do is use the bevel tool. So I'm going to start down here in the lower right hand corner, select this set of vertices with a box select, press Ctrl B for bevel, and then I'm going to left click to kind of add a bit of a bevel, and then bring up the menu. In this case, I want to add 2 segments, and this will give me the extra geometry that I need to build this corner of the shield. Now I can just go ahead and move some vertices around. And create the look that I'm trying to go for. Now don't worry a whole lot about being exact, we'll fix that in a moment. Go around with the bevel tool, add some extra vertices in, and then keep shaping this cube until it's into the final shape of half of the shield. So that's looking pretty good right there. I just want to clean up the shape a little bit. So what I want to do is for vertices I know need to be parallel, I can use the scale tool to make sure they are parallel. So for example, these two, I want to box select them. And then what I need to do is scale them in the Z direction to make them parallel. To do this, I press S for scale, Z because that's the direction I want to scale them on to make them parallel, and then press the number 0. And what that did is made them perfectly parallel. Now repeat the process for any other vertices that need to be parallel, factoring in which axes they need to be parallel on. In this case, these two need to be scaled along the x-axis to be parallel. And even if the vertices look parallel, it's not a bad idea just to do this operation anyway to ensure that they are. Alright, I'm happy with that for half my shield. Now we're going to make the hex pattern. In Blender, a hexagon is simply a 6 vertices cylinder. So let's add a new cylinder. We're going to set its vertice count to 6. The radius can remain 1 millimeter, and for the depth, I'm going to make it 1.5. Jump to the side view. Let me rotate it 90 degrees. Now I want to move it such that its center line is pretty well lined up with what's going to become the center line of the shield. And I want to align its top with just about the top of the shield. To create a grid of this, we're going to do several operations using what's called the array modifier. So over here on the right hand side, click on the wrench which says modifier properties, and then under generate, choose array, and you can already see it dropped in 1 extra hexagon. So we first need to create a row. So the relative offset here defines how far each of these new copies of this item is going to be relative to its size. So because we want a little bit of space between them, I'm going to actually have an x of minus 1.25. And now you can see there's a new copy over to the left with a little bit of space between it. Let's crank the count up to 10. And now I've got a giant row of hexes. Let's apply this array modifier. And we're going to add another array modifier. And now you can see this time it drops something off to the right. Well, that's not any good. We'll deal with that in a moment. What we want to do is drop it below and offset a little bit, kind of like a hex grid you often see in many tabletop miniature games. Well, if you're used to the 1980s tabletop miniature games, or Battletech, which is basically a 1980s game at this point. For the Y, let's try minus 0.5. And then for the X, now I want to move it over about half a hex, which, I don't know, let's try minus 0.0625. That's a little bit too much, so I'm just going to kind of tweak the numbers a little bit to bring it back. Let's try minus 0.05. Hey, that looks pretty good right there. But now they're overlapping along the Y, so I got to move them further down along the Y axis. Let's try, where's minus 1? Minus 1 is probably a little bit too much. So let's try, it's probably not an, uh-oh, whoopsie daisy. Not, minus 0.9 is not enough, I don't think. Here we go, minus 0.95 is pretty good. So now it looks like we have 2 rows of hexes. We'll apply that. And one more time, an array modifier. This time, no X offset. And a minus 1 to our Y offset. And you can see now we've got 2 more rows below it. Let's crank up the count until we completely cover our shield. And then hit apply. Alright, so we've got this giant grid of hexes alongside our shield here. I'm going to click on the object properties for the hexes and call them hexes. I am then going to click on the shield and let's call it shield. To limit the hexes to the shield, we're going to do a Boolean modifier. Once again, go back to the modifiers properties, add modifier, choose Boolean. For the operation, we're going to choose intersect. So where the hexes and the shield intersect each other is the area you want to end up keeping. Alright, for the object then, let's choose shield. And you can already see there the hexes are now reduced to the area of the shield. Let's hit apply. Let's jump to the side view here. And I want to move the hexes so they're sticking out about halfway out from the shield. So now if we go to solid mode, we can see a grid of hexes sticking out from the shield. Awesome. The next step I want to do is give the shield a little bit of a lip to it. So we'll click on the shield here, and I want to first apply its scale. So do Control A, choose Apply Scale. This is a behind the scenes math thing. And then for the scale factor up here, let's change them each to 1.02. So X, Y, and Z all go to 1.02. And all that did is it made the shield a little bit bigger than the hex grid around it. But what I need to do now is move the shield so that the middle line of the shield and the middle line of the hexes are still lined up pretty close. So that looks pretty good just like that. Now we're going to work with one of the most dangerous tools in Blender, and that's the knife tool. Press Tab to go into edit mode of the shield. Press A to select everything. K brings up the knife tool, and what we want to do is cut a line around the outside of the shield such that it's pretty close to the same thickness around the entire shield. Doesn't have to be perfect, just relatively close. We're dealing with like tenths of a millimeter here, so if the sizing's a bit off, you'll almost certainly not notice it on the final miniature. So we're going to start the knife operation somewhere out here. And I'm going to try to cut a line such that it follows the outside edge, but the distance from the outside edge is going to be relatively consistent across the entire perimeter. So left click somewhere outside here, and then just kind of follow along the outside vertices, left clicking to create a new segment. And then once you're done, left click once outside the piece, then press enter. Next thing I want to do here is to extrude this lip and bring it up so that it sticks out a little bit further than all the hexes. So we want to choose face select in the upper left hand corner, switch to solid mode, and then if we left click on the area we cut out, you can see it's fully selected. Press E for extrude and move it up until it's a little bit further out from the surface than the hexes. Okay, let's jump back into our vertex select mode and go to our front view here. And now what we need to do is do a little bit of cleanup. So the knife tool comes back out. Let's keep only this face selected. Press K for the knife tool. And what I want to do is draw a line from vertice to matching vertice on the outside. So if I zoom in here, you'll notice the knife tool will kind of lock to a vertice. So I want to left click when it's locked onto that vertice, and then left click again when it's locked on to the matching opposite vertice. Then just hit enter, and I've created a line from there to there. So carry this process around for each of these sets of vertices. Now what we want to do is kind of give the inside edge of this lip a little bit of a higher height, so that way it kind of slopes out towards the outside of the shield. So we're going to switch to line select mode in the upper left hand corner here. Double tap A to deselect everything. I want to shift left click on the inside edges of this lip. Now we're going to press G to move it, and then Y and pull it out a little bit further away from the shield. And therefore now it just kind of slopes up a little bit, and it'll give it a little bit of a cooler look. Now it's time to do a little bit of a cleanup, because we got some hard edges around here on the corners of our shield when we really want them to be a bit rounded off. So in line select mode here, I want to select each of the edges like that. So we're kind of going from the top of the outside of the lip around to the inside to where it meets with the base of the shield. And we can do that for each of these ribs. What I don't want to do is select these loops in the middle. Now let's use the bevel tool, so Control B, just kind of pull out a little bit, such that you don't want any of the bevels overlapping each other. So that's probably pretty good. Let's do 3 segments for each to give a little bit of a smoothing effect. I think that will look pretty good. Alright, so what we got here is a pretty good base for an Iron Star Alliance shield. Now let's create some interesting details on the inside. For that, all I'm going to do is add a cube. We're going to move some vertices around a bit. Then I'm going to select each of the 4 corners and bevel them. So now we got an interesting shape like that. That'll work pretty well. And I want to place this such that it's embedded in the main shield object, which is this line right here, but it's also sticking above the top of the hexes. So if we switch to solid mode, you can see I've got the piece right there. But I want to add even some more details into this piece, because I want to cut out a few kind of interesting shapes to it. So we're going to add one more cube. I'm going to take a cube, stretch it out to be a rectangle, bevel the corners, and we'll call that our new piece of detail. And then let me put it so it's kind of like that. So what I'm once again going to do is a Boolean operation. We're going to cut out this piece. So I want to overlap this object with our detail piece in such a way that the overlap is going to be the area that's cut out. Let's have some fun and add 3 cutouts to it. So we're going to select our 3 cutout pieces here. Control J, join them all together. Let's call them cutout. Then we'll select our detail piece, perform a Boolean operation. So we'll go to the modifier's properties, add modifier, choose Boolean, difference is going to be cutout. And that should work pretty good. Hit apply, and then I will move my little detail piece wherever I want. And then I'll duplicate it and put another one down here, because why not? I'm going to create one more of these detail pieces in a similar process. So now what I want to do is create some kind of, I call it circuitry, to connect these pieces together. It's just little line details. Or that's also pretty simple. We're just going to add a new cube. Let me scale it down and then kind of make it look like it's a long wire. And then we'll position it so that it looks like it's connecting each of these detail pieces together. Looks better, right? Let's rearrange some things like that. There we go. Sometimes you gotta make some changes in the fly because you realize one part of the model is overlapping for an area where it shouldn't. But then let's take this here and we'll bring that in like that. And then repeat this process. So let's bring this guy up here. Bring this height way down. And what I'm going to do, let's see, we'll move it up to there. I'm going to extrude it up a little bit such that this length right here is about the same as the width of the piece. And then we'll extrude it up that way. Then I can extrude out a wire here so you get like a little T-joint thing going on. And then what I want to do is add like another wire segment over here. And I'm going to make that one go over this way. We're going to put a piece of detail here in the future. And then let's go back to this wire and do something similar here. So for the last two pieces of the detail, it's going to be similar to what we did here, but I'm going to make them cylinders instead. So we're getting close to having this piece completed. What we need to do now is mirror the whole thing over to the other side. So we got to join everything together with the exception of any details here that are kind of overlapping the middle. So in this case, I got my shield, I got the hexes, all these three detailed pieces, and each of the wiring bits. We're going to finalize our selection by left clicking on the shield and press Ctrl J to join that all together. Let's jump to wireframe mode, press tab to go to edit mode, and what we need to make sure is that everything along this edge here is perfectly lined up. So box select everything that's going to be running along the middle of the shield, and then we're going to do our scale trick. So we get an S for scale, we're scaling the X direction, so X, and then 0. And now everything there is lined up. One more thing we need to do is make sure that any area that's going to actually be joined to the other half is going to be open. Right now these are solid objects with faces. If we were to go ahead and perform the mirror modifier and then join them together, there's going to be what's called an internal face, which is a mathematical construct that exists in 3D math and not in the real world, and this can cause some slicers to choke and give you very bad performance and cause all sorts of weird things to happen. So with these vertices selected, we want to press X for delete, but choose faces. If you go to solid mode, you'll notice you can see inside your piece. That's fine for now. We'll fix that in a minute. The last thing we need to do before we do the mirror modifier is make sure that the center of the object, which is this tiny little orange dot here, is lined up with the middle line of our shield. So go back into edit mode, press A to select everything, and then move everything over to the left along the x-axis until this orange dot is pretty close lined up along right there. Press tab to go back to object mode, and we're going to set the location of this object to 0, and we're going to do the same thing for each of our details that are overlapping the center line. Alright, finally we can do the mirror modifier. So let's click on our shield. We're going to go over to our modifier's properties. We're going to choose mirror under generate, and by default the X direction's by selected, and because of how we built our piece, things should be looking pretty good. Uncheck merge, we'll handle that part manually here in a minute. Alright, let's hit apply on our mirror modifier, and we got something that looks, well, like a complete shield. But what we do need to do is handle that merge process manually. So press tab to go into our object here. With everything selected, let's go up to mesh, choose clean up, and merge by distance. And now very carefully, when you click this, something's going to appear down here in the bottom of the screen. It's going to say how many vertices got merged. So for the merge distance, when it comes to 3D printed objects, probably start with 0.01. So this is basically 1/100th of a millimeter. Let's see what it says. Removed 40 vertices. So it merged some things together. And what we're expecting it to do is merge all the vertices along the middle line here. Does 40 seem about right? Yeah, 40 is probably about right. So I think what it did there is it merged all the vertices what I'm expecting. So I think we might have just done it all. If, for example, that number remained at 0 or it was really small, you can always just keep upping the size of that merge distance. But if you go too high, I'll watch what happens if you crank this number up too high. You'll see weird things start happening to your mesh. Yeah, so, but with that, we're pretty close to being done with this shield. Once again, I'm going to select my two details here that are not joined to the object, then the object, Control J, join them together. So we're almost close to being done. What I want to do is add a little bit more detail down here where there's a split in the shield. Why that's there? It looks cool, and it's science fiction. There is no practical reason why that should be there. But all I'm going to do is just add a few cubes down here. And then I'm going to play around with the array modifier to equally space them. What I want to do is add a little bit more detail to these individual cross beams here. So let's take all four of these guys. They're still in edit mode. Duplicate them. I'm going to move them along the y-axis. Let's scale them in a little bit. So we got something kind of looking like that. Now I want to make each of them a little bit smaller, but because they're all one object, if I try to scale them right now, right, it's scaling them as one object, which is a little screwy. So let me show you a bit of an advanced trick up here. If you go up to the top middle of your screen, there's a button that looks kind of like a chain link. It says Transform Pivot Point. Click on that. By default, it's normally selected to median point. That's kind of the most useful one. But I'm going to change it to individual origins. And then if I scale, now you can see that it's scaling each of these four objects around their own original center, which makes my life a whole heck of a lot easier for scaling multiple meshes that are part of the same object. And now I got uniform scaling and all sorts of fun stuff. Just make sure to change this thing back to medium point when you're done, or you'll probably drive yourself nutty. The last thing I want to do here is let's go to face select mode, and let me select each of these four faces, and let's just do a little bit of bevel on them. Nah, that's a little too much bevel. That's good. Just get a little bit of a rounding surface to them, because why not? Alright, let's take all of our individual pieces here. So these two knobby things, the little bars down here, and then the shield, join them all together. And with that, you've got yourself an Iron Star Alliance inspired shield for your Warjacks from Warcaster Neo-Mechanika. Of course, you can use these techniques to add some more detail, make things a little bit more interesting, but that's all kind of beyond the scope of this tutorial. But I've given you everything you need to go ahead and do that kind of stuff. And if you want to, you can even apply some details here on the back. But to export it, let's go up to File, choose Export, then STL File. Go ahead and save it out wherever you want to. The key thing to do here is to make sure you choose the option for selection only and that you have your shield selected. If you don't choose this option in larger projects where you have multiple objects, everything gets exported and it's a disaster. Alright, with those steps followed, export STL file, take it over to your slicer, 3D print it out, and you can call yourself officially a Blender modeler. So thank you guys all for watching. Once again, I'm Jason, the creator of the Tabletop Battlefield. If you like these Blender for tabletop gaming videos, go ahead and hit subscribe here on this channel. And be sure to check in later for other things related to 3D printing, as well as miniature painting, and of course, combat robotics. And have a great week.